Hello and welcome to Shannon Gardens. Thank you guys so much for joining me. So today I'm so excited to talk to you about one of my favorite perennials that I've had in my garden for years, and that is garden phlox. Garden phlox is a low maintenance, beautiful perennial. It's got many benefits that I have found and joy it's brought me in owning it. And I wanted to share some of those things with you guys. I also recently went on a trip to Lowe's, actually not looking for garden phlox, but ran across a few varieties there. So I wanted to share what I found with you guys, just so you can see some of the different varieties that are out there. So we'll take a look at that first, and then we'll come back here and I'll tell you guys about the benefits that I found in owning them, and any drawbacks that I have either had or researched about. All right, so I'll see you guys back here in a moment. All right, you guys, so right out of the gate here, I see some beautiful garden phlox. This is Opening Act Pinkadot for $11.98, and it's a full sun perennial and so pretty. I really love garden phlox so much, so that is beautiful. They have this color here, which is the Luminary Ultraviolet for $11.98. And look at that color there. That's so pretty. And then they have a more of a pink tone, pinkish purple here, and that is Opening Act Ultra Pink. Okay, so as I mentioned, I just love garden phlox, and there are so many reasons why. I've owned it for a long time and just find that this is a nice, low maintenance perennial. I have had it for years. I really don't have to do a lot with it. The blooms last a long time. The bloom season is nice and long. The garden phlox that I have generally starts blooming around the beginning of summer and will bloom through till fall. It attracts both hummingbirds and butterflies, which is always nice. I always like to attract as many butterflies and hummingbirds as I can to my garden, and bear that in mind when I'm planting my plants. And they come in a variety of colors like lavender, lilac, pink, purple, and white, and salmon. Garden phlox typically grows about 2 to 4 feet tall and about 2 to 3 feet wide, depending on the variety. Now you can get dwarf varieties, which may grow about 1 to 2 feet tall, whereas some of the other varieties and some that I have in my garden grow closer to 4 feet tall. So I really think it provides a nice backdrop, and then you can plant shorter flowers in front of that, and it just looks beautiful. And especially with that nice long bloom time, you find that your flowers don't really fade and just provide something to look out throughout the summer season. So the species name for garden phlox is Phlox paniculata. I hope I'm saying that correct. And that refers to the panicles of flowers or the flower heads. I did also want to mention that generally the garden phlox is recommended for USDA hardiness zones 4 through 8, although it does depend on the variety. So make sure to check out on your tags when you are looking at purchasing garden phlox that it's appropriate for your area. And just to give a point of reference, I am in zone 7B. So the sun requirements are full to partial sun. You'll want to make sure to look at the tag because it may vary depending on the variety. So you'll want to make sure to check out the tag on yours before planting to make sure that you're putting it in the appropriate spot. And I have read before that it's really more full sun in the north, whereas it's more partial sun in the south. I will tell you guys that I have garden phlox in both. So I have some that are more in full sun, then I have more that are in partial sun, and both do well. I will say though that I do have to keep an eye on the watering on the ones in containers, which really is true for most anything that you have planted in containers, but I really try to keep an eye on the garden phlox, knowing that it may have more watering requirements rather than the ones that are in the ground. Now, the ones that I do personally have planted in the ground get morning sun and afternoon shade. So I do have them under weeping hollies, and I'll show those to you guys in a minute, but they get that nice morning sun, but they're getting afternoon shade, and they've done very well. These are the ones I've had for years. I've divided many times over. As a matter of fact, the ones that I have in my containers, for the most part, except for some new ones that I planted this year, are from those that I originally started with in the ground. So I just cannot tell you how many times I've actually moved these flowers and planted them in different locations, and they've done well in all those locations. Now, when you are looking to divide, you'll want to probably divide in early spring. I've done it in later spring too, but I just have to bear in mind that I need to keep more of an eye on that to make sure that I'm watering well and that everything looks okay in the spot that I've put it in. So I've divided throughout the season, but early spring is what is recommended. Some of the different types of perennial phlox, in addition to garden phlox, are woodland phlox and spotted phlox, and those bloom more in the spring rather than the summer, which is when the garden phlox blooms. And then you also have creeping phlox, which is more of a ground cover, and that also blooms in the spring. The soil that the phlox does prefer is nice, well-drained soil. Now, one of the most cited problems or issues that people seem to have with garden phlox is powdery mildew. There are different varieties that are more resistant to powdery mildew, and so when you are looking for garden phlox, be sure to take a look at the tag and see if it's marked. Sometimes they might say that they're somewhat, and sometimes they might say very resistant to mildew. So you'll just want to keep an eye on that. Now, I have not had an issue with powdery mildew myself. One of the things that they recommend, and I think this is what has kept the powdery mildew at bay for me, is that I do not crowd my garden phlox. So I do not plant too closely. There's nice air circulation for those plants, and I believe that that's probably what has really helped me with the powdery mildew, where I just have not experienced that myself, but I do know it's something that people do talk about with regard to garden phlox. So I wanted to make sure to make you guys aware of that as well. Also, another way to help avoid powdery mildew is to be sure to water from the bottom so you aren't drenching those leaves and then allowing that mildew to start forming and build up. All right, so why don't we go take a look at the garden phlox that I have in my containers and in my garden. I do have one dwarf variety that unfortunately is not blooming yet, but as soon as it does start blooming, I'll provide you guys with an update so I can show you that. All right, let's go have a look. So this garden phlox is in one of my containers. I do have it divided into several containers. This is from my original plant that I had in ground, and I've divided multiple times. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name of this garden phlox. That's how long I've had it, but it has been a prolific bloomer and has really just allowed me to divide it over and over again. Now, this is a new addition for me this year. I planted it in containers, but I will probably divide that and put it in ground next year as well. This is the Coral Flame Dwarf Garden Phlox, and it is hardy in zones 4 through 8 with a width and height of 15 to 18 inches. This is a full sun perennial and attracts butterflies, and I just could not resist this gorgeous color. I thought it was just beautiful, and it has been blooming ever since I first planted it. So this is the oldest garden phlox that I have, and it has been divided many, many times. I've placed it in other parts of the garden as well as containers, and it has always done quite well. One thing that you'll notice is that I do not have a lot planted right up to it, and that allows for the nice airflow. So to help avoid the powdery mildew. And one of the things actually that I love about this phlox is what is going on right now. Whenever there's a breeze, I just love the movement of the phlox itself. I just think it's so beautiful. Here are some of my most recently divided garden phlox from the initial plants that I just showed you guys. And those plants are under a weeping holly. I've decided to carry that through the garden, and this year I divided and transplanted under the 2 remaining weeping hollies that I have in my garden. And as you can see, these have just done so well being transplanted just this year and are already blooming. They're just very, very healthy. They're about to bloom here as well. And I also wanted to point out that I decided to carry this through, and I pulled a couple more sprigs just in the last week or so and planted them, continued the planting around the weeping holly here. And while it is definitely not an ideal time to transplant, it's been very, very hot the last week. All I've done is made sure to keep it watered, and it looks like it's going to take. It looks like the garden phlox will take and should be pretty healthy and is thriving, which I think just speaks to the resilience of these plants. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I was so excited to share with you guys the garden phlox perennial and how much I truly enjoy having it in the garden. So thank you so much again. I did also want to point out that these make great cut flowers too. So just something else that I wanted to add in there, because I certainly love cutting flowers from my garden and making little bouquets out of it as well. So I wanted to make sure to tell you guys that. Thank you so much again. Please make sure to like and subscribe. And until next time, happy gardening and goodbye.